A 33-year-old fuel ship ran aground off the coast of Oman, and the most powerful navy on Earth could not refuel its own aircraft carrier. It had to go rent a commercial tanker at nearly double the going rate. This was peacetime. One accident, one ship. A war with China is the version where the fuel chain is the first thing the other side aims at. The debate about a war over Taiwan counts the wrong things. It counts bases, ships, and missiles, as if the side with more platforms simply wins. The variable that actually decides a long war in the Pacific is fuel, the storage to hold it, the tankers to move it, and the crews to run them. The United States can reach Taiwan on day 1. Whether it can keep fighting there on day 30, under attack, rests on a fuel chain that an enemy, an accident, a missing crew, and an ally can each cut. The platform count measures arrival. It says nothing about endurance. Start with the number the ship count hides. The United States military burns about 12.6 million gallons of fuel a day in peacetime, and a major Pacific air and sea campaign pushes that figure higher. That is roughly 4.6 billion gallons a year, enough to make the Department of Defense the single largest fuel consumer on the planet. The thing that decides a Pacific war is not how much of that fuel exists. It is whether the flow can survive being targeted. Everyone agrees the United States has the platforms. Almost no one asks what keeps them running. A carrier and its air wing do not run on access to a base. They run on fuel delivered without pause, much of it by underway replenishment, where an oiler pulls alongside a warship at sea and pumps fuel across while both ships are moving. A single carrier strike group and its aircraft burn through millions of gallons a week. The limit is not how many warships the Navy owns. It is how much fuel can be pushed forward and kept flowing while someone is trying to stop it. That is the whole inversion. A fielded fleet is only as powerful as the fuel chain standing behind it. Park the most advanced strike group on Earth in the right ocean, cut the fuel reaching it, and within days it is a collection of expensive metal that cannot launch a sortie. The order of battle counts the metal. It treats the fuel as already there. The fuel is not already there. It is the contested variable, and it is the one the entire debate skips. Put down the ship count as a measure of strength. It tells you how many machines exist. It tells you nothing about how long they can keep moving. If fuel is the binding variable, the next question is where it was stored and whether that storage can survive being hit. The place that stored the most just closed. Red Hill was an environmental story. It was also the single largest fuel reserve in the Pacific, and it is gone. Built into a ridge above Pearl Harbor during the 1940s, the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility was 20 steel-lined tanks buried under 100 feet of rock, holding up to 250 million gallons, feeding American operations across the Indo-Pacific by tanker for decades. There was nothing else like it. Then, in 2021, fuel leaked from the facility into the drinking water at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, sickening thousands of military families. In March 2022, the Secretary of Defense ordered the facility defueled and permanently closed, and the draining began in 2023. Here is the part the contamination headline buried. When the largest hardened fuel reserve behind the Pacific posture was removed, no reserve of comparable size and protection was built to take its place. The Secretary of Defense said so plainly when he ordered the closure. A giant centrally located depot made sense in 1943. It makes a great deal less sense against modern precision weapons, so the fuel would be dispersed instead. That logic is sound right up until you ask what dispersal actually costs, which is the next layer. Closing Red Hill subtracted up to 250 million gallons of hardened storage, the largest single reserve underwriting American operations in the Pacific, and nothing of that scale replaced it. Stop filing Red Hill under cleanup. The Pacific lost its biggest tank, and the tank did not move somewhere safer. It emptied. So the biggest tank is gone, and the natural assumption is that a new one is being built somewhere quieter. That assumption is wrong, and watching it fall is the whole point of this section. The Pentagon's plan, described to Congress, is to relocate fuel to existing support sites scattered across the Indo-Pacific and to lean harder on tanker ships, including commercial vessels chartered under a program called the Tanker Security Program. No new hardened depot of comparable capacity is coming. That single fact kills the idea that closing Red Hill arrived with a replacement. It did not arrive with a replacement. It arrived with a redistribution, and a redistribution is not the same thing as a reserve. One hardened depot is a single point of failure, which sounds bad, so dispersal sounds like the fix. But trading one fortified tank for many smaller, softer, more exposed sites does not remove the vulnerability. It multiplies the number of fuel movements that have to cross the Pacific and the number of nodes that have to be tracked, guarded, and resupplied while under fire. The chair of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, Representative Mike Gallagher, made exactly this point in a January 2024 letter to the Secretary of the Navy, warning that the dispersed sites would require far more frequent trips by ships around the Pacific, adding operational risk. He also noted the Navy appeared short by several dozen of the ships needed to move the fuel, citing a 2016 Defense Department finding that it would need 86 tankers for global operations. There is no new Red Hill. The plan is to scatter the fuel across smaller sites and move more of it by ship, which trades one hardened target for many soft ones and a great many more voyages. Drop the assumption that the reserve relocated to safety. It did not relocate. It scattered, and a scatter is more targets, not fewer. The entire dispersal plan rests on a fleet of tankers and oilers to do the moving. So look at that fleet, because if the plan needs more tankers, surely the Navy just builds or charters more. The harder truth is that the Navy may not be able to crew the ships it already owns. The core replenishment force is 18 Henry J. Kaiser class ships, about 15 of them oilers, many already past 30 years old, and a dozen of them not even double-hulled. The newer John Lewis class meant to replace them has been delivered, but the rollout has run slower than planned, and the lead ship has been sidelined by repairs. And the binding constraint is not only steel, it is people. Military Sealift Command, which runs these ships with civilian mariners, was weighing whether to lay up roughly 17 of its own support vessels, not because they are broken, but because it cannot recruit enough mariners to crew them. You cannot count your way out of that with a shipyard. That opening image of a navy that could not fuel its carrier now has a name and a date. In September 2024, the 33-year-old USNS Big Horn, the only dedicated oiler assigned to the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, ran aground off Oman and flooded. There was no spare oiler to send, so the Navy scrambled to charter a commercial tanker as a stopgap. And a commercial tanker is not a clean substitute for an oiler. To pump fuel into a warship moving at speed, it would first need a specialized fueling system installed, with tensioned hoses and high-capacity pumps and trained mariners to run it. And even then, it moves slower, which leaves the carrier exposed for longer during every refueling. The Big Horn was not an isolated mishap either. It came amid a string of military Sealift Command groundings against the backdrop of that same crew shortage. In September 2024, one navigation error put the only oiler serving an American aircraft carrier out of action, and the most powerful navy on Earth had to go looking for a civilian ship to fill the gap. Bury the idea that the fleet can simply scale to meet the plan. It cannot crew what it has, and one accident in calm water showed how little slack is left. If this is the kind of analysis you want more of, subscribing is how you keep getting it. If the fleet is this thin, the obvious fix is to stop relying on long ocean voyages and store the fuel closer to the fight, which means storing it on someone else's soil and that someone gets a vote. Basing access means forward fuel, the thinking goes. Access to park is not permission to stockpile. To shorten the vulnerable tanker runs the thin fleet cannot sustain, fuel has to be pre-positioned forward at EDCA sites in the Philippines, in Japan, at places like Subic Bay. But building substantial fuel storage on Allied territory is politically visible in a way a missile battery is not, because fuel arrives in enormous trackable shipments. In January 2024, about 39 million gallons of American fuel arrived at Subic Bay. That fuel came from the very reserve being emptied at Red Hill, dispersed forward exactly as the plan intended. And Subic is not even one of the agreed EDCA sites, which is precisely why it set off a fight. A Philippine senator, Amy Marcos, who chairs the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, demanded to know where in the country millions of gallons of military fuel were being stored, and tied the shipment directly to preparations for a war between the United States and China over Taiwan. That is the trap built into the plan. The EDCA sites are sold to the public as places for troops and missiles, but they are likely to become fuel nodes too, and every new tank and every new shipment can reopen a political argument in an allied democracy. The wartime fuel backbone has to be poured onto ground that belongs to governments that answer to their own voters. In January 2024, about 39 million gallons of American fuel landed at Subic Bay, which is not even one of the agreed bases, and a Philippine senator stood up and demanded to know why. Forget the notion that a basing agreement settles the fuel question. Every tank on Allied soil reopens it. Each layer so far installed one weak point. Now they connect. The forces are real. The expensive mistake is treating sustainment as the back office of the war, because the fuel chain can be severed at 4 separate points, and only one of them is the enemy. The first hand is the People's Liberation Army. It can target fuel depots, fueling piers, and tankers, knowing that starving an opponent of fuel can do more than sinking every one of its warships, which is why contested logistics runs through Chinese analysis of how to fight the United States. The second hand is an accident, the routine kind that breaks a fleet stretched this thin, as one grounding off Oman already proved. The third hand is a crew shortage that idles ships the Navy already owns, no enemy required. The fourth hand is allied politics, which gates the forward storage the entire plan depends on. None of these 4 show up anywhere in an order of battle. A ship count cannot see an empty tank, a missing mariner, a foreign parliament, or a targeting decision made in Beijing. That is why the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party put it as bluntly as it did in January 2024. Without a dependable fuel logistics framework, American operations in the Pacific could, in its words, grind to a halt. Contested logistics is not a footnote to the war. It is the war's actual hinge, and 4 different actors each have a hand on it. Whether the United States can sustain a war over Taiwan is not answered in Washington's ship count. It is answered by a fuel chain that an enemy, an accident, a manpower gap, and an ally can each sever. Sustainment is not the back office of this fight. It is the front line, and 4 different hands are already resting on it. Step back, and the whole way of measuring the war changes. The order of battle is a snapshot of who shows up. The fuel chain is the clock that decides who is still standing a month later. Once you see that, every familiar number reads differently. The biggest navy on Earth becomes a fleet that can arrive, but might not endure. The basing map becomes a list of places to run low on fuel. The celebrated platform count becomes a measure of reach, not of staying power. This is what control actually looks like at the level that decides long wars. It is not owning the most weapons. It is being able to keep yours running while the other side cannot, or making sure the other side runs dry first. The party that controls the fuel does not need the larger fleet. It needs the larger fleet to stop moving. So watch the thing nobody is counting. The most powerful navy in the world was stopped in peacetime by a single old ship hitting the bottom of the sea. The weapon that decides the next great war is not a missile or a carrier. It is a tanker full of fuel, and there are not enough of them. You made it to the end, which means you think the way this channel thinks. Subscribe and the next one finds you.